Alan here.
Welcome, welcome everyone to NCRR's 40th anniversary celebration. I'd like to say congratulations to all of us for having been together for about 40 years and working on the important historic redress campaign. And I want to congratulate all of us for getting onto the Zoom today, a new platform that is not without its challenges. So we really have to shout out to our Nikkei Progressives, our young people tech team, Mia Barnett, Alex Nauta, and Miyako Kato. Miyako, I'm sorry, I'll get your last name, Noguchi. And they are enabling everything for us today with all the videos, all the technology. So we really, really appreciate all of their effort. My name is Kay Ochi. I am going to be one of the co-chairs for the program today. And I want to say that in 1981, I joined NCRR on the very day that I saw the commission hearings and heard the Issei and Nisei testify. It changed my life. It changed many people in this room, their lives. And I want to say that we haven't looked back and we're here today, 40 years later. So those of you who entered the Zoom a little early, you saw the 40th anniversary flyer created by NCR longtime member David Monkawa. David has created dozens of our DOR posters and event flyers over these past 4 decades. So big shout out to David. Thank you very much. And also the music that you heard were taken from Glenn Horiuchi's CD, Poston Sonata, and John Jang's Never Give Up. Both of those artists have supported NCRR for many, many years. And I'll toss it to MC number 2.
Sorry, a little glitch there. I was muted. I was saying brilliant things while I was muted. Anyway, my name is Susan Hayase. I'm from San Jose. I was a member of the Nihon Machi Outreach Committee and participated in the founding conference of the NCRR. And I was very privileged to represent the NCRR and the Civil Liberties Public Education Fund. And I'm also a co-founder of the San Jose Nikkei Resistors. So I'm going to give you a couple of technical Zoom instructions. So I wanted to just tell you that you should be all muted just to keep your background noise out of the program. I want to encourage everybody to identify yourself in the chat, your name, your pronouns, your region and organization if you feel like that. We're going to record this program for posterity and possible educational purposes. If you prefer not to be recorded, please just stop your video. There's a stop video icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Let's see. We've planned a 90-minute program with many stories from chapters of the NCRR, San Diego, Gardena, Los Angeles, San Jose, and San Francisco, and East Bay. There's going to be a very short break at 3:30 with an open mic from 3:30 to 4 p.m. So we hope that the stories that we tell will spark your own memories. Also, we have NCRR members presenting toasts in honor of NCRR's work. So we hope that you have a favorite beverage by your side. And if you have questions or comments, please use the chat. And if you'd like to share during the open mic,
it's for later.
Please mention that. And could people please mute themselves? Thanks. Let's see. Lastly, we won't be sharing a complete history of the NCRR, but there's a book for that. We're going to share the location of where you can buy the book, NCRR, Grassroots Struggle for Japanese American Redress and Reparations. And now I'm going to toss it back to Kay.
Thank you. The organizing committee was really, really enthusiastic and wanted to kick off our program today with a film created in 1989 by one of our NCRR and MP members, Alan Kondo. The film, Justice Now, Reparations Now, was created shortly after the 1987 Washington, D.C. delegation and after the 1988 passage of the Civil Liberties Act. But the film has been a really important part of NCRR's outreach and education for these last 3 decades. And so we're really, really happy that Alan stepped up to volunteer to edit down his film to 12 minutes. So we're going to show a 12-minute excerpt of Justice Now, Reparations Now. And thank you, Alan. But immediately following the film will transition into another important moment, which will be our in memoriam slideshow to pay tribute and to honor the NCR members that we worked with and who are no longer here. So please sit back, enjoy Justice Now, Reparations Now, and then during in memoriam, take the time to reflect upon our friends who really helped us fight for all these years, and especially for redress and reparations. Okay, tossing it to
A resolution supporting redress was introduced by Edison Uno at the 1978 Japanese American Citizen League Convention. This kicked off a debate within that organization regarding the issue of monetary compensation. Because of its grassroots character, NCRR saw that Japanese Americans considered individual monetary compensation to be the essential demand. At the time, some leaders in the community thought this was unrealistic and suggested instead an apology and a community fund. NCRR, because it worked day to day in the community, accurately expressed what the majority of the community felt. They saw the camps as the product of American racism, not simply as a political mistake. This historical approach linked the redress movement with the struggle of blacks and other minorities. NCRR's strategy was based upon educating and uniting the entire community and not relying solely on politicians, lobbyists, and experts. The National Coalition for Redress and Reparations had been founded in 1980 by individuals and grassroots organizations such as the Little Tokyo People's Rights Organization of Los Angeles, Japanese Community Progressive Alliance of San Francisco, Asian Pacific Student Unions, Nihon Machi Outreach Committee of San Jose, and Concerned Japanese Americans of New York. At this time, the National Council for Japanese American Redress formed to pursue a class action suit against the government for internment. Also at this time, Aiko Yoshinaga Herzig and Michi Weglin uncovered and publicized the government's deliberate suppression of evidence during the Supreme Court's review of the landmark Korematsu Yasui and Hirobayashi cases. The NCRR sought legislation as the fastest route to redress, a way to mobilize the most people, and a way to forge a united front with other organizations. While each group took a different approach, they all shared and advanced the overall movement. In response to community demands for redress, President Carter established the Commission on the Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, which held nationwide hearings in 1981. NCRR worked closely with the Commission to ensure that there would be night hearings for working people, that the hearing rooms were accessible and would accommodate enough people, and that simultaneous translation was available. NCRR provided transportation and held mock hearings to prepare testimony. Rather than a forum for academic experts, what took place was a community triumph.
Talk about being let out of camp in 45, 44, 43. I don't think we ever did get out of camp. I think we're beginning to get out of camp now.
Feelings of rejection, alienation, inferiority, insecurity, anxiety are feelings that are much too familiar to our Sansei youth. As one student stated in her term paper, the shame and humiliation that my parents suffered were passed on to me. And although I never saw barbed wire, tasted mess hall food, or lived in cramped barracks, my mind is still imprisoned from that experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was 7 years old when we had a Christmas party. And I remember they provided us with toys from the outside. And I got this old repainted toy. And the adult who gave it to me was rather embarrassed because the toy was clearly broken. So they passed out this stuff, and I took it, and I could see that he felt very bad. And I can understand these feelings because I have a child of my own. The last thing I'd want to give him is a broken toy. Well, I took that toy, and I threw it in the trash can later on. I looked at it and I threw it away, right on the spot. Okay. And to me, that toy symbolizes how we as a minority are treated in this country. Second class, broken, all the promises are broken.
I'm June Kesey, representing the Southern California Regional Chapter of the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations. This commission should place the priority on correcting the injustice and to submit the following concrete solutions to Congress. First, we ask the continuing education of the public about the truth of this event so that the American people of today and in the future may learn from and not repeat past mistakes. Second, we ask the Commission to recommend whatever is necessary and appropriate to overturn the legal basis for the evacuation order so that no branch of government can arbitrarily strip away the freedom and civil liberties of any group of people. Third, we insist that the government include those of other races and nationalities who suffered similar unjust actions of the government, including the Aleutian, Pribilof Islanders, and Peruvians, in our pursuit of redress. Fourth, we ask for a community fund to help compensate for the sociological damages done by the evacuation. And most importantly, we strongly call for direct monetary compensation to each victim of the concentration camps or to their heirs who were affected by Executive Order 9066.
The Commission findings affirmed the growing sentiment in the community for justice and concluded that this infamous episode was the result of race prejudice, wartime hysteria, and a lack of political leadership. The Commission also recommended $20,000 in direct monetary compensation. In 1984, Japanese Americans won a significant victory when Fred Korematsu and Gordon Hirabayashi's wartime convictions for refusing to enter the camps were vacated by the Supreme Court. In a most critical period, July 1987, NCRR led an unprecedented lobbying delegation of 140 people to Washington, D.C., just weeks before the House floor vote. This grassroots delegation, having confidence in themselves and knowing justice was on their side, created an emotional impact that could not be matched by any professional lobbyist.
And the real issue here today is an issue of fundamental principle. How could I, as a 6-month-old child, born in this country, be declared by my own government to be an enemy alien.
But worst of all, we lost our most basic human rights. Our own government had branded us with the unwarranted stigma of disloyalty, which clings to us still to this day.
On the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution, the House passed H.R. 442 by an overwhelming 243 to 141 vote. In April 1988, the Senate passed the bill by a 2/3 margin.
On this vote, the yeas are 67, the nays are 27, and H.R. 442 as amended is passed.
After the House vote, the NCRR called for a major letter-writing campaign aimed at Reagan. The NCRR eventually collected over 20,000 letters and mailgrams.
To date, I have personally mailed out about 8,046 letters, and in about a month's period, I have done about 714 mailograms to the President, urging him to sign the bill. And it has been very exciting for me. I treasure every letter that I fold and put in the mailbox. It's been great.
The long campaign for redress and the perseverance of the Japanese American community culminated in the signing of the redress bill on August 10, 1988, by President Reagan.
You can take one arrow and you can break it. But you put 5 together, it'll be very difficult to break. It's togetherness. It's a kind of a spirit of being collectively working towards some goal. I think that's key. I always remember my dad telling me that, about how we brothers must stick together and be working towards a certain goal. Using that in our community, we did. We stuck together. JSL, NCRR, NCJA, Quorum Novus legal group, the whole community, we stuck together and we worked towards that one goal. And we attained victory.
This victory belongs to the former internees and other members of the Japanese American community who overcame their differences to mount and sustain an historic grassroots campaign. To those who endured and resisted the wartime violations of their rights. To those who sacrificed their lives on the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific to vindicate the honor of their families behind barbed wire. To those who labored in dingy archives to document the government's suppression of evidence, to overturn the charges against the resistors. To those who demonstrated a collective strength in exposing the stark realities of camp life at the Presidential Commission hearings. To those individuals and organizations of all colors and creeds who passed resolutions, contacted legislators, and sent thousands of support letters and mailograms. And to those 60,000 to 80,000 parents and grandparents and brothers and sisters who have passed on and would have wanted to celebrate this moment, you are especially remembered.
All right. That lovely music was by Glenn Horiuchi, Oxnard Beat from Post and Sonata, and John Jang, Butterfly Lover's Song from Never Give Up. I'm very moved by that slideshow, and I'm going to give a toast to the ones who have passed away. You know, one of the motivational phrases that I've been thinking about is the one that says, be a good ancestor. I think that I speak for all of us when I say that the many people we have lovingly memorialized here and many more have fulfilled this admonition through their lifetimes of struggle, of holding fast to principle, of commitment to justice, and of support and friendship across age, generation, region, class, and life experience. People talk about learning from the past, and each of us needs to think about how that applies to us because, you know, the past is coming up pretty quick. And now it's up to us to pass these stories on and to enrich and strengthen our movement by nurturing firm and supportive roots in the past so there can be future ancestors in the making, loving, caring for, and inspiring the generations to come. And so I want you to join me in a toast. Minasan, raise your glasses. So the day may come when all our ancestors will be forgotten. All stories will come crashing down into dust, but this is not that day. What say you? Kanpai. Thank you. Now to you, Kay.
Thank you, Susan. Your toast was very moving also. It was really heartfelt. Thank you. To change the tempo a little bit, we're going to now speak to hear about some of our current members. And one of our members who could not be here, regrettably, has sent us a short video of congratulations, and that would be Jim Matsuoka. Jim was a founding member of NCRR, as well as the Manzanar Committee and the Los Angeles Community Coalition for Redress Reparations, that's LACR, which was the forerunner for NCRR. And then immediately after Jim's short video, we've invited Alan Nishio, longtime NCR member, one of the founding members of NCRR and of LACR. And during the 1980s, Alan was one of the co-chairs for NCRR. So we'll start with Jim and then go right straight to Alan. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jim Matsuoka, and normally and every time I usually wear my mask, but just for this one short time, I just want to say I want to congratulate all of you that are part of NCRR. You've done a wonderful job, and there's still a lot more to do. So I think we just need to just keep at it. I think we've accomplished a lot of things. So I know we have, as a matter of fact. So anyway, congratulations to all of you. I hope to see you soon, and take care, and I'll wear my mask.
All right, well, thank you. It's sobering to follow up some remarks from Jim, whom I had a chance to work with for over 50 years, as well as recall the NCR activists who've passed on. I think their personal stories spurred so much of the drive for redress, and it's nice to remember them. I appreciate the opportunity to celebrate with you. Many of you on this Zoom call were present during the NCR's founding conference 40 years ago. Others joined at different points during the campaign, while there are many others who are not present during the redress victory, but are continuing the fight for civil liberties and justice. So welcome to all of you. At our 40th anniversary, we want to take some time to remember, rejoice, and recommit. This is a time to remember. For many, we are at a point in our lives where we're reflecting on what we have done in our lives. And this journey has been one in which NCRR has played a significant role. For many, the redress campaign was indeed a highlight of our lives, so it is a time to remember. Let's take some time and remember the moments during this campaign that are personally meaningful to us, be it during the commission hearings, rallies, teach-ins, letter writing campaign, the lobbying delegation, and all the work we did in building a grassroots movement. And let's also remember and marvel at the work we did in creating a movement that had changed the narrative for social justice and the Japanese American experience. In social justice, we see the current campaign for Black reparations and the impact that redress has had on that campaign, as well as on the discourse in our country around the racist immigration policies of the Trump administration. Within our community, redress has changed the narrative of what it means to be Japanese American. Prior to redress, the JA experience was dominated by Nisei leaders of the JACL that was reflected in the title of Bill Hosokawa's book, Nisei, the Quiet American. Today, we are no longer seen as quiet Americans. This is also a time to celebrate. Let's celebrate the power of the grassroots movement to create change, how we came together to build a broad coalition and unite our community, how our fight for justice reaffirmed the quote from Margaret Mead, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Let's also celebrate the friendships we have made through this struggle, a bond that is created through our common work and has lasted through the years. It is indeed a special feeling that we all have. And finally, this is a time to recommit. Our redress victory would be hollow and self-serving if we did not recommit to the struggle for social justice going on today. Our work is not done. Now is not the time to sit back and rest on our laurels. There is too much work to be done, and we have too much to offer to the struggle. The lessons of the camps and redress victory are more important now than ever before. Under Trump, we have seen the rise of a revisionist history that denies the camp experience and the importance of redress. We must recommit our efforts to fight against this racist revisionism. Let's also recommit to one of NCR's founding principles of unity, to support the struggle of others who have faced racism, scapegoating, and injustice. Let's continue to fight the social justice and keep on engaged in this struggle during these troubling times. In our opening video, we witnessed the transformative power of people sharing their stories. For the Issei and Nisei during the commission hearings, we saw for the first time some of them shared their experiences in camps. Our next speakers will be sharing their recollections about the power of standing up and speaking out. In order, you will hear from Richard Katsuda from Los Angeles, Kay Ochi from Los Angeles, and Donna Kotake from San Francisco. So I'll turn it to Richard.
Thank you, Alan. I am a founding member and current co-chair of NCRR. I started in San Jose as a founding member of the Nihon Machi Outreach Committee. In 1981, I had just started as executive director of UIKI Senior Center. When NCRR began recruiting testifiers for the CWRIC or commission hearings, I felt compelled to bring together Issei to testify. I knew it wasn't going to be easy and that I had to strategize. We must remember that the Issei had suffered terribly. They were already in their 40s to 70s during World War II. They had been prohibited from becoming naturalized citizens. They couldn't own land because of laws targeting them. And they couldn't speak English well and were severely isolated. Then during the war, their rightful place as the authority in the community was totally subverted, as many Issei leaders were rounded up and interned in the Department of Justice camps. And then the young Nisei of the JCL were anointed by the government as the new leaders and spokespersons for the community. After the war, the Issei, at their advanced age, had to start all over again in this country that had so mistreated them. So getting Issei to testify before representatives of that government would be a tall order. I figured that I should start my attempts with Umeno Fujino, a tiny but feisty woman with a heavily raspy voice. I approached her with the question of whether she might speak before the commission. I started gently and slowly, talking about how the commission needed to hear what she and other Issei had to say. She was looking down, taking it in. Fujino-san then said in Japanese, "That was a long time ago. I really don't have anything to say. They're not going to listen to an old lady like me." I kept talking about how what she had to say was so important and that the commission did want to hear her story. But it seemed that I was getting nowhere. Then I thought and said, "But Fujino-san, kodomo no tame ni, you need to do it for the sake of your children, your grandchildren." She thought for a moment, then said, "So da ne," meaning, that's right. She thought for another quick moment, then she looked up at me and said, "Okay." After that, it was relatively easy to get 4 more Issei to testify: Masuo Akizuki, Kima Konatsu, Tsueko Yamasaki, and Soto Yoshida. The 5 Issei were driven to the hearings at Golden Gate University by Mas Hirata, the UI Kai van driver. Mas later told me about the trip up to San Francisco. He told me that the atmosphere in the van was so tense and quiet that you could hear a pin drop. You can imagine, here you are going to testify before the government that had done so much to ruin your lives. But at the hearings, they were magnificent. In Japanese, they boldly told their stories. It was a tremendous moment. And so on the way home to San Jose, they were laughing and singing, so happy and gratified that they had done it. For they had finally taken the guilt and shame they had felt for 40 years and placed it squarely on the shoulders of the US government. Our next speaker will be Kay Ochi.
Thank you, Richard. That was really a great story because it represents the stories from the hearings that propelled us, really moved the redress and reparations campaign, and really fired us up. And one of the big occasions in NCRR was the 1987 Washington, D.C. trip. And, over 100 people participated, upwards of 140. And so in 1987, we all flew to Washington, D.C. and, took time off of work and saved our money for this trip. And I was, through NCRR, worked closely with Miya Iwataki, who scheduled the the congressional visits. And so I came in the day before the opening session, and we were going to prepare, she and I were going to prepare the lobbying teams. Well, we read through 100 delegate profiles, and then we had to read the profiles of all the congressional members that we would visit. And then we had to match the delegates into teams and try to maximize the impact to represent the representation of each group to match the congressperson that they would be speaking to. So you can imagine that was an all-nighter and kind of typified the excitement we all felt, kind of the energy we had to have. And but early the next morning, we were in Congressman Dymally's office typing up the lists, team members, and the congressional visits. And remember, back in 1987, there were no computers. We were typing, typewriters, and we were using erasable typing paper and carbon paper. Okay, well, The excitement of the NCR members and friends really was palpable throughout Capitol Hill. We hurried around in our teams, and in between meetings, we would kind of gather up again in the cafeteria and, you know, get a little coffee and food. A little aside, a group of us happened to be in the underground tram system tunnels, and who should we run into but that very distinguished, handsome Congressman Ron Dellums from Oakland. Now, I had a kind of a crush on him, so he consented to having his picture taken with us, and I have that to this day. And it just kind of was an example of the fact that we were on a mission, but we also had great fun. I don't think we could have sustained ourselves for 40 years if we didn't have a lot of fun along the way. So for most of us, it was our first real concerted lobbying effort. It was our first trip to Washington, D.C. You saw the excitement. If you see the full version of Alan's film, Alan Kondo's Justice Now, Reparations Now, he really captured a lot of that excitement. And of course, the NCR book also tells many of the stories. Let me just conclude by saying what's important is that the participation was empowering for each and every one of us. And for many of us, it was part of the healing that we probably didn't even know we needed to really fight for, directly fight for justice for our parents, their generation, the Issei, and for our generation. So it was a really exciting time. Thank you. And I'm going to toss it now to Donna Kotake.
Thank you, Kay. Wow, thanks for all the hard work. I didn't realize that you and Mia had done all that prep work. So actually kind of falls right into my story. So as you can tell, the lobbying delegation in 1987 to Washington, D.C. was just a tremendous event. Our lobbying team was fortunate to have Wally Nunotani, a 442nd veteran on our team. And Wally served in many campaigns with the 442, and most notably the rescue of the Lost Battalion. So one of our meetings was with the representative Michael Andrews from Texas. So Wally let him know that he was actually an honorary Texan because of the role that the 442 played in rescuing the men from the 36th Infantry Division. And this affected Representative Andrews so much, and he expressed great appreciation for the sacrifices of the 442. Wally really boosted the credibility and the morale of the whole delegation. Now I'm going to turn it over back to Susan.
And I'm going to introduce our next toaster. So born in Poston, Bill Sato was a member of the Tule Lake Committee and one of the co-authors of Kinenhi, Reflections on Tule Lake, as well as a longtime active member of the San Francisco NCRR. Bill's going to give a toast on grassroots organizing. And remember to unmute, Bill.
All right. Let me just click on this thing here. Okay. Well, it's great being here, and what can I say? But my toast is to the grassroots organizing, and all afternoon long we've been hearing about the power of the people, the ordinary people, not the professional lobbyists and others who make Washington, D.C. a familiar haunt. For many of us who went on that delegation to Washington, D.C., it was a first-time experience. And as they say, if you show up in Washington, you count for 500 votes. So they took us seriously when we were there. So this toast is to all of the people and the power of the grassroots, which is perhaps the underlying theme of NCRR, to all those who fought and came from the campus struggles for ethnic studies and for the housing and community preservation projects, and for all those pilgrimages. I went on 4 of them, and they were very instrumental in moving a lot of people to support redress and fight for redress. So here's a toast to grassroots organizing. Join me.
Kampai.
Kampai. And I'm going to turn it over now to Jan Tokumaru, formerly of San Diego, now Los Angeles.
Thank you, Bill. I was in Los Angeles before spending some time in San Diego. So I had my start with LT Pro and was part of the founding of NCRR, and then carried that over to San Diego. Glenn Horiuchi was a grad student at UCSD, and he involved his parents, Liz and Aki Horiuchi, who were staunch supporters of redress and reparations in San Diego. You may recall having seen Glenn perform with Lillian Nakano, Glenn's aunt, for many NCRR events. Glenn's passion for the movement was expressed in his organizing as well as through his musical collaborations. Taiji Miyagawa, who was also attending UCSD at the time, became one such musical collaborator with Glenn, and they both contributed greatly to the community building, bringing together a diversity of folks. Taiji is currently active in Los Angeles with the Pacific Asian Network for Action and continues his musical performances. In San Diego, with the support of the JACL there, we were able to build relationships with many Nisei to prepare testimonies for the LA Commission hearings and with other Nisei who opened their homes to us for meetings. Our first house meeting was hosted by Hideo and Kyoko Ochi. Hideo and Kyoko were Kay Ochi's uncle and aunt, and they were very proud of her leadership with NCRR. In these house meetings, we found that people were curious as to why we Sansei were involved before sharing their own stories. And eventually, after recalling long forgotten stories about their families being in camp, they remarked to each other things like, "I didn't know that happened," or "My own kids do not even know about this." So there was an outpouring of emotional energy in sharing their truth then, as there was in every house meeting. These intimate conversations were an essential part of uniting and empowering a people's movement for redress and reparations. Excuse me. And that's just, one part of all that was going on in San Diego at the time, but thank you very much. I'd like to turn it over to Marlene now.
Hi, my name is Marlene Tonai, and I was a co-chair for the San Francisco NCRR for many years. I wanted to talk about our Day of Remembrance programs because I think one of the main components of grassroots organizing was all of the public programs that we organized over the years. And I'm pretty sure that each of the chapters each February organized a Day of Remembrance program. DOR was one of the main ways that we had to inform and mobilize the community around our fight for redress. At the same time, it was the main vehicle to educate the broader public about the incarceration and also to build ties with other communities fighting for justice. In San Francisco, for example, over the years, we had speakers that included Jesse Jackson, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, and representatives from Native American and Muslim communities. For the last 20 years, the Bay Area Day of Remembrance Consortium has sponsored DOR and has included speakers from the immigrant rights community. One tradition that made our San Francisco DOR unique, if I may brag, was our candlelighting ceremony. Back in 1985, NCRR member George Iwao suggested we incorporate a candlelighting ceremony as a way to commemorate former internees. So George designed and built this great wooden structure that featured a guard tower in the center with 5 candle holders on each side to represent the 10 concentration camps. Each year, individuals from different organizations, different generations are invited to participate as a moving way to pay tribute to the former incarcerees while also highlighting our allies in current struggles for social justice. So I want to recognize George for his ongoing legacy to Day of Remembrance. Now I'd like to introduce Kay Ochi. Thank you.
Back again. I wanted to chime in because I love the Day of Remembrance programs. They were a main part of my work in NCRR over the past 40 years. And on one hand, while it took 6 long months of meetings and worry to put together a 2-hour program, the DORs were a wonderful collaboration. We had many community groups, come in and work on the DOR, and we supported a lot of young people coming in to learn more about the community, which was also a benefit. We shared the important business of redress and reparations, how to advance that campaign, and even into the later decades, we supported other communities. And one of the things that NCRLA is proud of is that we supported heroes and sheroes who are not really looked upon that way by large segments of our community. For example, in 1999, the DOR NCRR gave its Fighting Spirit Award to the Fair Play Committee. They were resistors of conscience during World War II and looked down upon by a large majority of the community. Frank Emmy, Mits Koshiyama, Yosh Kuramiya, and 6 other FPC men came to that DOR to receive the award and the community's gratitude. I really was so proud of NCRR for being early and staunch supporters of the Fair Play Committee. Frank Emmy, one of the leaders of the FPC, joined NCRR in the early 1980s and taught us about the resistance in the camps. And he became our ally, our friend, and our hero. And another hero, James Omura. He was a journalist who had editorial support, personal support for the Fair Play Committee and the resistors. The US government indicted him for his editorial support, and although he was later exonerated, he was ostracized and persecuted by the majority of the Japanese American community for most of his life. For the 1994 DOR, NCRR flew Mr. Omura from Denver to Los Angeles to receive the Fighting Spirit Award. And despite his very hard life, he was delightful, he was friendly and warm, and he enjoyed seeing some of his old friends as well as making many new ones. In June of that same year, I had the privilege of flying to Denver to represent NCRR at Mr. Omura's funeral. It does give me great pleasure to recall how happy he was at the 1994 Day of Remembrance to receive that award, to be surrounded by staunch supporters, friends, and admirers. Okay, now I'll turn it over to my buddy, Miya Iwataki.
Thank you, Kay. I wanted to talk about Congressman Mervyn Dymally, an unsung hero in the redress movement. And there's so much to say, but here are some highlights. I met Congressman Dymally at a Gardena Town Hall meeting in 1981 as part of NCRR's campaign to get the word out to the community about redress. He invited me to his office, and the next week he came to Little Tokyo to meet with NCRR's steering committee at the JACCC building. That was Bert, Lillian, Jim, Allen, and myself. He loved the grassroots nature of NCRR, and he encouraged us to introduce legislation. So we worked with Attorney Gerald Sato to draft a bill. Merv mentored us. He came to my mom and dad's house one Sunday morning. I cooked breakfast for everyone, and then he literally rolled up his sleeves and went through every line of that legislation, giving suggestions, revisions, and talking about clarity. Then his legislative director put it in a bill form, and that's how NCRR bill HR 7384 and HR 7383 was introduced. Early on, NCRR put together a small delegation to send to Washington, D.C. I don't remember who was on it, but I think it was Kay, Bert, Sox, and some 442 people. Merv set up congressional visits for our little delegation, and his office set us up in homes of different legislative staffers that on the Hill. And I forgot about this, but he organized a reception. He hosted a reception for NCRR and JACL in Rayburn Hall, and about 125 members of Congress or their staff showed up. By that time, later on, I was working for Merv, and he was the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, which every time a redress bill was introduced, the CBC was the first to sign on, quickly followed by the Hispanic Legislative Caucus. Fast forward to when Speaker Jim Wright, who is one of the most powerful speakers of the House, Democrat Texas, came to California for the first time and asked Merv to handle his schedule while he was in LA. Well, amidst all the lobbying to get time with him, Merv made sure that he set aside one night, and we had an API dinner for Speaker Wright at Jimmy's in Beverly Hills. Woohoo! First time many of us ever went to a Beverly Hills restaurant. But that gave NCRR a chance to talk to Speaker Wright about our bill. It gave him an opportunity to meet with 442nd vets. And I think we had one survivor from the Texas Lost Battalion. And Speaker Wright remembered the Texas Lost Battalion and their pledge to the 442nd. I mean, there's so many, but another contribution, and Kay touched on this, Merv was an important part of the success of our 141 person delegation to Washington, DC in 1987. He flew me out 2 weeks early, and I spent every minute of time scheduling over 100 visits, congressional visits for our delegation. During the delegation, his office was home base. It was the place where people went every night to send their stories out to their local media. When people got lost, they came to the office. When they lost their schedule, they came to the office. You know, we were just deluging his office, and it was so important to have someone there, you know, a friend on the Hill for us. But I just wanted to close by saying that Merv always spoke to other members of Congress and to whoever about how NCRR was responsible for the success of the redress and reparations. He saw NCRR as the unsung hero, and we see him as the unsung hero, and rest in peace. And now I'm going to turn it back over to somebody. Kay?
Microphone.
Remember to unmute, Kay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mia, because it really was a wonderful time. It's now my honor to introduce our next presenter, who will make a toast in honor of grassroots leaders. That's Roy Nakano. Roy represented the Gardena chapter of NCRR, which was the Gardena Committee for Redress Reparations. And he was also a founding member of the LA Community Coalition on Redress Reparations. So Roy goes back a long way. So, okay, Roy.
Okay, thank you very much. So this toast is going to include a story from the 21st century. In fact, just 8 years ago, and it's the story, some of you know about it. It's the one with the JACCC. Whatever happens, leave my name out of this. Those 8 words, more or less, were uttered by 2 with explosive information about the newly hired CEO of the Japanese American Community and Cultural Center. One person confided in NCRR's Jim Masaoka, the other with NCRR's Kathy Masaoka. The information was that the new CEO, vetted by the JACCC's prestigious executive search firm, was an international fugitive from justice. Now, knowing that many of its colleagues with the JACCC were quitting and expressing unhappiness with the center's new administration, Jim and Kathy met with the board chair, and then Kathy and also Carrie Morita contacted the French consulate, and then Jim again wrote an open letter to the community. All of a sudden, the CEO packed his bags and was gone For NCRR, it was another gambate moment. So here's a toast to NCRR, the hometown badasses, for not being afraid to take on a challenge, whether it's demanding monetary reparations or speaking out for the workers of the community. Thank you, NCRR.
Bye.
And continuing on the topic of grassroots leaders, we'll now be hearing from June Hibino in Los Angeles, Marlene Tonai in San Francisco, Mari Matsumoto in San Francisco, John Ota in San Francisco, and Richard Katsuda in Los Angeles. June, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everyone. Bert and Lil. You know, it seems much longer, but Lillian only passed away 5 years ago. And up until then, I'd look in on her once in a while, and we'd have lunch sometimes at Kotohira in Gardena. And as time passed, I noticed that Lil was becoming more frail and forgetful. So we talked about many things, jumping from topic to topic. And often we'd look back on the past. And I remember asking her once, Lil, when was the happiest time of your life? And without a hesitation, she said, when I was an activist. So, you know, Lil got involved when she was in her 50s, and it wasn't easy for her to break out of what she called the Nisei experience of oppression, fear, and alienation. She would say, boy, that racism we faced after camp chipped away at my self-worth. I thought maybe I really was inferior. But the grassroots redress movement transformed everyday people like Bert and Lil into organizers and leaders. And Lil really pushed herself to speak up and to fight against her tendency to be pessimistic. She was the first one to encourage and support other people, and she was a great role model for the women, especially in NCRR. And Bert became an all-round leader. He was respected by both the working class folks, the truck drivers and the gardeners, but also by other national redress leaders and members of Congress. And, you know, Bert was NCRR's national spokesperson, but people may not know that Lillian wrote all his speeches. He would think of the broad strokes, and Lillian would put those ideas into a coherent speech. They were such a great asset to NCRR. They were the bridge between the aging Nisei and the young and often radical Sansei. And because they were former incarcerees, they added credibility to NCRR. They were always open to new ideas from us Sansei, and they truly supported other communities and other movements in their struggles. So to me, Bert and Lil represented the best of their generation. They were so proud to be a part of NCRR, and they would have been thrilled to be here today celebrating with you all. Next, we have Marlene Tonai.
Thank you, June. I'd like to share some remembrances now of another great Nisei leader, a female leader here in San Francisco, Sox Kitashima. There's a lot I could say about her. We first met Sox and several of her friends in 1981 at a House meeting when we were trying to meet Nisei and encourage them to testify at the hearings. She had just retired from her clerical job at the Veterans Administration, so she was really anxious to get involved. And after she testified and attended all 3 days of the commission hearings, it just really solidified her commitment to fighting for redress. I remember the first time we asked Sox to speak at a public program, she was really nervous and she asked for help with her speech, and she rehearsed and rewrote her speech many, many times. But as anyone who has ever heard her knows, she became a really powerful public speaker who spoke with a lot of conviction and emotion. And she always made sure she had Kleenex at the podium because there were always tears when she spoke. She did everything for 20 plus years, from teaching us Sansei how to roll makizushi for potlucks, or I should say she tried to teach us how to roll makizushi. She oversaw our letter writing, the lobbying campaign, representing us in the halls of Congress. And essentially, she was the San Francisco contact for the Office of Redress Administration, because I'm pretty sure she was on the phone with them every day. She was that committed to making sure that anyone who could possibly qualify got their redress payments. And there's many stories I can tell about that. But I think the other thing to remember is that she's fought for redress when it was not always a popular position to take. And she used to tell me that some Nisei would purposely avoid her when she was out collecting signatures on petitions or letters, or they would chide her and they would say, God, Sox, why are you wasting your time? And are you still doing that? And she would just simply say, it won't happen if we don't try. And I've actually heard her say that to people many times. In her biography, Sox says, quote, "The NCRR is the greatest thing that ever happened to me." And I think we can easily say that all of us owe her a huge debt of gratitude. We are so fortunate to have worked with her and learned from her what it truly means to be a community leader. She was a great role model for all of us. So thank you, Sox. Now I'd like to introduce Mari Matsumoto of San Francisco. Mari.
I didn't think about this, but following Marlene, talking about Sox makes it hard to start my thing with dry eyes. But I'm going to talk about Fred and Kathy Korematsu, whose involvement with NCRR started with Fred's quorum nobis cases. And they became very active members of the NCRR Bay Area chapter and participated in our events and activities. NCRR recognized that when we were starting our fight for redress, that the Supreme Court cases were a major impediment to our achieving our goal. And we knew that these shameful decisions by the Supreme Court that upheld the constitutionality of the curfew and mass evacuation and incarceration was not just an embarrassment, but also jeopardized all Americans as long as they remained on the books. So when evidence was uncovered that showed that the US government had willfully suppressed evidence in Fred's and Gordon Hirabayashi and Minyasui's cases, showing that the Japanese Americans were actually did not present a threat, and there was no military necessity for our incarceration. NCRR was an early supporter of the quorum nobis cases and reopening the Supreme Court cases. Our chapter became most closely affiliated with Fred and his legal team because they were also based in the Bay Area. We helped raise awareness of the new developments in his case and to help build support by organizing people to show up at the San Francisco District Courthouse on November 10th, 1983, when Fred finally had his new day in court. Actually, so many members of the community turned out that the judge in his case, Marilyn Hall Patel, recognized this was also the community's day in court and moved the hearing to her ceremonial courtroom, which was still packed and overflowing. It was a bit hard to follow what was going on because of the legalese layperson language barrier, but watching the attorneys break into smiles gave us a clue that, yeah, things had gone well. And you could see former incarcerees surreptitiously wiping away tears, and others later expressed they never thought they'd see that day, and they felt that a heavy burden had been lifted from them. I think winning his petition also lifted a burden off of Fred, because for many years he avoided speaking about his case, and he kept such a low profile that when his quorum nobis legal team was first approached about reopening his case, their first reaction was, "Oh, that guy's still alive." And when he first started making public appearances with either his legal team or the other quorum nobis petitioners, Fred's remarks were very terse, really short, reflecting his discomfort with public speaking. On one occasion, he was so nervous, he actually referred to the Asian Law Caucus attorneys as the Caucasian lawyers. Despite his initial discomfort, Fred continued to speak at NCRR's programs and events. And in 1987, he and Catherine joined NCRR's lobbying delegation to Washington, D.C. And watching Fred blossom from a shy, reticent person to a confident and effective public speaker was extremely inspiring for all of us. And John Ota will give an example of how Fred's development as a public speaker and redress advocate were so effective.
So after the historic victory of passing the redress bill, we were stunned to find out that Congress refused to provide any funds to carry out the redress bill. So all of a sudden we had to remobilize all over again. And so in 1989 or 1990, as part of that mobilization, we sent people back to Washington, D.C. Fred Korematsu and I were among that group. Before we went, as usual, we called different offices, including Senator Inoue's office, to set up appointments. But Inoue's office said, well, he's too busy, he can't meet with you, but you can meet with one of his aides. We didn't like that, but that's the way it was with him and some of the other JA lawmakers, that they weren't really thrilled to be meeting with us all the time, because especially in cases like that, because they knew that we would be there to put a lot of heat on them. So anyway, we got to Washington, and Fred and I were walking around in the Senate, one of the Senate buildings, when all of a sudden we spotted Senator Inoue. And Fred was a really soft-spoken person, although he was very down to earth. And he yelled out, "Hey, Inoue!" And Inoue, was like a Senate powerhouse and a legendary war hero. I think he was probably pretty shocked to be addressed that way. He froze, and both of us rushed over to him and told him that, we had wanted to set up a meeting with him, but that his office said that he was too busy. He obviously wasn't very pleased at this encounter, but under the circumstances, he agreed to meet with us, and later he did. So I think this incident shows that some of the JA lawmakers didn't always look forward to meeting with us or working with us, but it was precisely because of the pressure that we put on them, from the community, that they worked so hard to win redress. In this particular case, it looked very bleak as far as getting redress funding until Senator Inoue used his considerable influence to make redress funding an entitlement, that is guaranteed funding like Social Security, which eliminated the need to fight each and every year over the small scraps of discretionary funds that were available. And looking back, I sometimes think that Inoue came up with this so that he wouldn't have to deal with us coming back year after year and putting him and others on the spot. So next up, we'll hear from Richard Katsuda.
Thank you, John. In the early 90s, NCR started hearing about people who were being denied redress. And so throughout the 90s, NCRLA devoted tremendous energy to fight for them. We worked with many attorneys, forming a legal team with members of Japanese American Bar Association, and other key attorneys were John Ota from Bay Area, Gerald Sato, member of NCRLA, Reggie Chan, and Lisa Ikemoto. A major area was the railroad and mining workers who had been terminated by the railroad companies during the war. These workers and their families who lived in Utah and other regions outside of the camps lost their only means of livelihood and had to struggle to survive. NCRLA worked closely with Fumi Shimada of Florin JCL, who made it her mission to win redress for the railroad workers and their families. Fumi and her husband Sam drove all the way from Sacramento to LA to attend the press conference at which Acting Assistant Attorney General Bill Lan Lee announced that the railroad workers and their families would receive redress. What a victory. During that same period, we learned about how Japanese Latin Americans, or JLAs, had been essentially kidnapped from their homes and brought to the US as part of a prisoner hostage exchange with Japan. Their citizenship, their citizenship papers were taken from them, and so they became stateless people. And since the Civil Liberties Act required that redress recipients be US citizens or permanent residents during the war, JLAs were outrageously denied redress. So in 1996, NCRLA worked with Grace Shimizu from the Bay Area to form Campaign for Justice, or CFJ. It was a new redress campaign. We worked with JLAs Carmen Mochizuki, Alice Nishimoto, and Henry Shima in LA, and Art Shibayama and Libya Yamamoto in the Bay Area. I was so impressed that at our press conferences, the JLAs spoke in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Japanese. And CFJ had a dedicated legal team of Robin Toma, Manju Kulkarni, Fred Okren, Paul Mills, and Chris Prince. In 1998, CFJ was successful in winning redress for JLAs, but it was bittersweet as JLAs received only $5,000 per individual. CFJ continued its legislative campaign, but was not able to achieve redress equity. However, Art Shibayama refused the $5,000 and sued the federal government for redress equity. He lost, but he continued his quest for justice in 2003 with his brothers, and they went to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. That commission finally ruled in his favor this past May, but it was again bittersweet as Art had passed away in 2018. San Jose NCR NOC activists will always remember Art for his persistence and steadfastness in seeking justice. They will never forget his warmth and kindness when he patiently befriended them, joining his voice with theirs without hesitation in the fight for redress, always speaking out at community events, schools and colleges, and never turning down a chance to talk to anyone about his experience as a JLA and about Crystal City and what the US government did. Art will always be an inspiration to us all. So now I'll give it back to Susan.
Okay, thank you so much. Those stories about the grassroots leaders are very inspiring. And now we're going to have a toast by Julie Yumihata, who was a founding member of the San Jose Nihon Machi Outreach Committee, and she participated also in the founding convention of the NCRR. Yumi.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. I have my coffee. This is my drink of choice, especially for NCRR movement. But I'm really happy to be here on this very special occasion and to do a toast to the creative artists and culture who have been such an essential, vital part of the redress movement from the very beginning. And I'm so glad that we began with some of the music that was composed and performed by some of our grassroots activist artists, John Jang and Glenn Horiuchi. I wanted to, before I introduce the other speakers in this section, I was trying to think of what to say, and of course there's too much to say. And the liner notes for John Jang and Pan Asian Orchestra CD recording, Never Give Up, was brought to my attention, and they were written by Jina Hota, the late Jina Hota, radio producer, musician, arts advocate, early NCRR activist, translating for Japanese testifiers, preparing for the commission. And so I wanted to share just a few of her words that are so beautifully expressive of the importance of art and culture in the redress movement. So Jina writes on the liner notes, Reparations Now, musical movements of struggle and celebration. The taikos, Japanese folk drums, sound out the heartbeats of spirits never vanquished and summon the beginning of a new cycle. Dancing the dance of sugar plantation workers. This is pretty emotional. And ending with the tankobushi, a Japanese folk dance of coal miners. We dig up our history, separating the dirt from the gold, searching for redress and reparations for a past wrong. Quote, let us not forget the humiliation and the loss of dignity of being herded into 10 Fran racetrack, searched like criminals and furnished and herded into 10 Fran racetrack, or furnished a horse stall for what was supposed to be our protection. These are the words of Sox Kitashima's DOR speech. Many did not survive the psychological stress of confinement and the humiliation of being regarded as traitors. She goes on. Reparations Now, dedicated to Akira Kato, Chiyako Sox Kitashima, Bert Nakano, and all the organizations who fought for justice. If we need teachers and heroes, we need them now more than ever. So that's what Jina Hota wrote about Reparations Now and how John Jang was inspired to write something like this, hearing the stories, the testimonies, and knowing the experience of those who were interned. And I think that that is part of the soundtrack, as some would say, for our movement, our redress movement, and the music of John and Glenn Horiuchi and so many other people, and as well as the visual artists, the filmmakers, the media arts people like Mia, Alan Kondo today, David Monkawa, and so many others who have played such a vital, and I'll say essential role in making this a movement for us, you know, completing our humanity as a people collectively and as individuals. And we can see now today, as we talk about ongoing multi-generational trauma in communities, including the JA internment, that we are still on that journey. 45 years later, some of us, as we got on this process for justice, we thought to right a governmental wrong, we now, I think, are realizing that it's also an inner process for us to really gain our full humanity. And that is the kind of story I think that the music will allow us to experience, as well as the visual arts and film and radio, sound, performing arts, the crafts, the origami, all of that lived cultural experience that has been part of our events is something that I think that we can be proud of, and it's a great contribution. So to our artists of the redress and reparations movement, thank you. And may we have many more generations, as we are seeing, many more generations of creative artists drawing on this experience, healing, regenerating, revitalizing, and transforming us. Thank you. And I would like to recognize that next we will have Jane Kawasaki from Nihonmachi Outreach Committee talking about the camp art shows that were organized, followed by Edna Horiuchi talking about her husband Glenn Horiuchi's work.
Thank you, Julie, Yumi. As you mentioned, I was part of NOC's Art and Culture Committee in San Jose during the NCRR redress movement in the 80s. And part of organizing the community meant coming up with a variety of ways to inspire, engage, and bring people together from different ages and backgrounds to build a stronger sense of belonging, identity, and unity. And art and culture helped us do that by reaching people's hearts as well as their minds. We organized 3 camp art shows to provide an opportunity for former incarcerees to reflect and share their own camp experiences, and to educate young people, some of whom had little or no knowledge about what their parents and grandparents had gone through in the camps. We created and performed a skit in 3 parts entitled Nikkei Wars, The Community Strikes Back, and The Return of the Jedi, using giant black garbage bags for costumes as a way to inspire Japanese Americans to throw off the model minority role and join the fight for redress. We included performances by shakuhachi player Dick Matsueda, shigin by Mr. Masuo Akizuki, and original music from early in the careers of jazz musicians John Jang and Francis Wong into our programs and events. We held a community mochitsuki event. We learned to silkscreen t-shirts and posters and make ceramic knock-knacks and to raise funds. And we held workshops like, how do you talk to your coworkers about redress and reparations? All of these ideas were the outcome of brainstorming, strategizing, and working sessions, sometimes going until late into the night, where each of us was able to contribute our unique ideas and skills, and where I learned firsthand the power of grassroots action to accomplish a feat that many thought was impossible: redress and reparations for former incarcerees. I hope that we never forget those lessons and that we continue to work together with new generations to come up with creative ways to strengthen that sense of belonging, identity, and unity across the Japanese American and broader American community as we continue to strive for a more inclusive and just society for all. Thank you.
My late husband, Glenn Horiuchi, wrote Poston Sonata as a way to honor the Poston attorneys. He was deeply moved when working with the San Diego community and hearing their stories at the commission hearings. In addition, he was able to listen to the testimonies of his grandfather and father, an emotional experience. Lillian Nakano, Glenn's aunt, was a classically trained master of Nagauta shamisen. Glenn persuaded her to start playing again by having her teach him how to play shamisen, and later by having Lillian perform his music, including Poston Sonata. They performed at Day of Remembrance and even toured together, with Lillian's husband, Bert, acting as her personal roadie and making travel arrangements. Asian Improv was formed in 1987 by John Jang and Francis Wong, originally as a means for Asian American artists to produce their own albums and arranged concerts. Jazz musicians John Jang, Francis Wong, and Glenn were Asian American activists who admired African American artists like John Coltrane, Miles Davis, and Thelonious Monk. John Jang and his Pan-Asian Orchestra performed John's composition Reparations Now, which incorporated jazz, Japanese taiko, and tanko-bushi, a Japanese folk dance. It was dedicated to activists and organizations who fought for redress reparations, and even included part of a speech from activist Sox Kitashima. Asian improv arts now includes collaborations with a diverse group of musicians, dancers, poets, performance artists, and filmmakers to showcase artistic works representing the Asian American experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our speakers so far. And it's my honor to introduce the next toast giver, Tracy Kato Kiriyama. And Tracy is an interdisciplinary artist, community organizer, and longtime collaborator with NCRR. She's worked for us on several artistic projects with Day of Remembrance, and most recently, Tales of Clamor, an original play which highlighted the 1981 Commission hearings. So Tracy will now give another toast.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? I'm so excited to be here today, and it's so emotional and awesome because of it. And so I was asked to think about the camaraderie between generations in this toast. And hearing everybody today, you know, I was thinking about all the people that I never got to meet, that you all worked with, people that I still have yet to meet and want to meet on this call, and then people that I have gotten the pleasure and honor of working with for definitely well over 20 years here in Los Angeles. So, you know, when I think about camaraderie between generations, I really think about intergenerational work as both an acknowledgement of everything that has come before us, but also a commitment to the future. And I think that the really inclusive nature of NCRR and allowing yourselves to be challenged by other generations and other communities and to be involved with you has been such a great lesson for all of us, and an entry point into intergenerational work. So I hold you with such like high esteem, like the greatest esteem. And I talk about you all the time in so many other organizing circles. You have so many lessons to share, and it's awesome to still work with so many of you, that we're not done yet. And like Jim Matsuoka says, we're not done, we have a lot more to do, and we're gonna do this forever. So I just wanna say, just congratulations and happy anniversary, and I love y'all. So can we toast kanpai? Okay, so I have the pleasure now of sharing a little story and then introducing two other folks to speak a little bit about camaraderie between generations and intergenerational work. I just want to share like a little moment that I think about to this day. I was in my early 20s. I was sitting at a meeting for a Day of Remembrance program here in Los Angeles. And a bunch of different people were talking about like the different issues and problems coming up, and you know, the difficulties with the program. And I said something really sort of snide, like, well, that's life. And Kathy Masaoka looked at me and she was like, is that Tracy? Is that true? Is it life? And I was like, oh, she sort of like stopped me from just sort of like going off on some weird tangent that didn't have much thought. And I know that it was like this little exchange, but it makes me laugh. And I think about it to today because I think about the ways in which being involved with other generations in this work has always helped me to grow. And they kept me involved. They still also sat at the table and listened to what were some pretty zany ideas coming from me. And so they also shared such an openness to being able to be challenged back. You know, and I think about so many years later when I approached them with my stage partner, Kennedy Cabasares, to work on a piece. And, you know, they maybe hid their hesitation, but as with all the other years of working together with all of these crazy ideas that I had, they didn't seem to flinch when we were like, hey, can we look at every single minute of all the commission hearings and then maybe do a piece about like noise and silence, and it's going to be based in theater and circus. And they just went with it, and they took risks, and they take risks, and it has opened up so many possibilities, I think, for the ways in which we do this work. So yeah, I am just ever grateful. And Richard Katsuda said in one of our meetings when we were kind of reflecting and evaluating the process, he said, you know, we would like to continue to develop this work with you. We don't know what's next, but we want to. And Richard said, well, we want to work with you forever. And I will hold him to that. I will hold you all to that. But I also just hold that so deeply in my heart. Like that made my whole day, month, year. So yeah, I'm just, yeah, thankful. I'm thankful. And the last thing I wanted to share, you know, is that it's amazing as well to see so many folks in all of these different regions expanding the work with other generations and having people from NCRR to partner with us in co-creating and building Nikkei Progressives down here in LA. And really, again, another practice of intergenerational work that's really mindful. And, you know, we get to be learning alongside like the young guns now, and, you know, the folks running this call like Mia and Alex and Miyako, you know, like behind the scenes, but so much at the forefront, I think, of our future. So excited always to do this work with so many different folks in all directions. So I now have the pleasure of passing it on to Tom Izu and then Susan Hayase, both of the San Jose Nihon Machi Outreach Committee.
Hi, I'm going to talk about Mits Koshiyama and my work with him as a sansei. Many of you know Mits, that he was one of the 63 Heart Mountain draft resistors. And you may know he was convicted and sent to McNeil Island Penitentiary and called a traitor by the JCL for his draft evasion. And that with dogged determination, he continued his efforts to get the JCL to acknowledge their role in the suppression of resistance in the camps and to apologize to the resistors. But for me, there is more to this story. Mits taught me and other sansei activists in San Jose that the quiet American image popularized about Nisei was not only inaccurate, but covered up rifts in our community that alienated us from our own parents. We met Mits at one of our Day of Remembrance programs when he hesitantly approached us after the program had ended, and asked if we knew about the resistors. Although reticent at first, Mits became a key activist in our redress work, presenting us at events, forums, and the media about his experience, never shying away about speaking out. But he confided in me a dilemma he faced. He felt grateful to find a Japanese-American group that would accept him and allow him to fight for redress. But at the same time, he was surprised by the anger he still held within him against the JCL and other members of our community who had made him into an untouchable, as he said. He wanted them to finally admit that the resistors weren't traitors, and he wondered if it was really possible to do both at the same time. Mits worried that his participation in NCRR could possibly hold us back in our redress work. He told me about how many resistors felt they needed to keep a low profile. He had even heard that the resistors would be blamed if redress didn't get passed. Learning about the resistors' story through Mits, Sansei NOC members felt strongly that the stand taken by them was significant, principled, and inspiring. We felt that fighting for redress was like resisting the draft in the camps. Years later, in 1992, we gave Mits an award we called the Fighting Spirit Award. While the statement commending him was being read, it took him a while to realize that we were actually talking about him. This is how modest he was. He told us later that he kept thinking, hey, that guy's pretty good. I wonder who he is. I'd like to meet him. It was a real vindication for Mits to receive a standing ovation in the packed gym of the San Jose Buddhist Church. And not just for him personally, but it represented a real change of tide for how JAs felt about breaking free of the model minority story of compliance in the camps. Mits helped me understand that our movement was a fight to heal all of us, not just as individuals, but as a community spanning all generations. I will never forget Mits for helping me learn this. I am proud that the NCRR allowed Nisei and Sansei a way to contribute together as equal partners in the fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to talk about Sue Tokushige. So many of you have heard of Sue Tokushige's harrowing and dramatic story of the baby who died on the train to Poston, and her all hands on deck effort to keep her 3-week-old baby alive in a concentration camp with bad food and too much stress for a nursing mother. She told her story to the US government at the commission hearings in San Francisco, and it also has been retold by Brenda Wong Aoki in Big Bands Behind Barbed Wire, and also by Tracy Kato Kiriyama in Tales of Clamor. We met Sue at a house meeting in San Jose, but she had been telling her camp story to high school history classes for years. She became a leader in the Nihon Machi Outreach Committee during the same time that I was learning how to be a leader. And Sue was simultaneously solid as a rock and a hurricane moral force in the local redress movement. Once she confided in me that her kids weren't happy about her speaking in public or being interviewed, and felt uncomfortable with her being so out there with her views. And interestingly, Mits Koshiyama had told us something similar. I told Sue that my parents weren't thrilled with my political activity, and we kind of bonded over that, and we had a lot of sympathy for each other. When Sue passed away last year, her daughter called me and demanded to know whether it was true that Sue was really a leader in the redress movement. I affirmed that she was, but her daughter asked me, she said, well, I've been to the museums and they don't mention her. After I gave a eulogy at Sue's celebration of life, several of her grandchildren came up to me and told me, Nana was really kind of a mean person.
No, soon though.
I was taken aback by that because although Sue was clearly an extremely strong person and someone with a little bit of an edge to her, she was also gracious, friendly, and supportive to all of us young Sansei in NOC. And I wanted to say this about Sue for 2 reasons. One is something that I learned from her, to never treat anyone as a generation or a stereotype, but to get to know them as clearly as you can, as a unique and quirky individual. And another reason is to remind us that many of the former incarcerees that we worked with in the NCRR paid a big price for what they did. So we hope that people who didn't know Sue can tell from what we say about her and what we've done with our lives, how important she and others like her were. Thank you. And now I'm going to introduce our next toast, Tony Osumi of Los Angeles, joined NCRR during the mid-90s and was active in the new Otani Workers Support Committee. He is currently a member of Nikkei Progressives.
Thank you, Susan. It's an honor to be asked to take part today. So appreciate it. NCR has a 40-year history of building solidarity. They've supported Navajo from Big Mountain, Arizona, joined the Free South African movement, walked the picket line with workers in Koreatown and Little Tokyo, and built a 20-year friendship with Muslim Americans. Internationally, NCR has supported comfort women, spoke out against the fingerprinting of minorities in Japan, and stood with World War II enslaved Chinese workers seeking redress. They even organized a delegation to Cuba. This solidarity work continues today with support for immigrant justice, the movement for Black Lives Matter, and reparations for slavery. I'd like to ask all of you to join me, raise your glass in a toast to NCRR, solidarity, and the transformative power of Japanese Americans uniting and building solidarity with other communities and justice-minded people everywhere. L'chaim. Let me introduce you to our next three speakers. It's going to be Suzy Katsuda from Los Angeles, Bill Sato from San Francisco, and Kathy Masaoka from Los Angeles. Suzy, take it away.
Congratulations to us all for the important work and wonderful memories of the past 40 years. And we could not have done so well without the support of many others in the communities. The Little Tokyo Service Center for providing free meeting space to NCRR LA from 1980 through the 1990s. The Rafu Shimpo, as well as the Hokubei and Nichibei, for their decades of support through news releases to outreach to our communities to advance the redress campaign. In Los Angeles, to Ron Toma and Associates, the CPA firm, for gifting NCRR with free tax returns for 20 years. Also to Miles Hamada, although he didn't attend our meetings, his community art and IT skills have helped us tremendously. To Mary Lynn Kwan for the many donations of boxes of senbei, and Suzanne Toji for the donation of delicious food from Feast from the East for so many events.
I'm Bill Sato from San Francisco, NCRR, and I'm going to speak about a trip I took in 1991 under the auspices of the Japan Pacific Resource Network, and the leader of this trip was the late Gina Hota, who you've heard about before. Gina was one of the great educators in our Bay Area because she always had ideas about programs to do and things to investigate. So she worked briefly at the Oakland Asian Cultural Center as well as doing her show on the radio. But in 1991, she organized this trip with the Japan Pacific Resource Network, and we visited Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, and Kyoto. And we met with people very interested in redress because we had just come off that victory in 1988, and they wanted to learn about how we did it. So the disgruntled people there in Japan included people of Korean extraction, both representing North and South Korea, and the Burakumin, or the outcast group there in Japan, who were historically oppressed by the Japanese government. So we visited them and heard from them and talked with them about our campaign. And we had no easy solution about how to win it because we weren't that familiar with the local conditions there, but it was very interesting to us. And we also happened to attend a conference there, other groups seeking redress and restitution from the Japanese government. And the Japanese government committed a lot of abuses of people at home as well as abroad. For example, the Koreans there in a place called Utoro, they were on land owned by the Nissan Motor Company, and they were virtually forced into slave labor, and they never got paid for that. So they were seeking compensation. One feature of that visit also was the coming out of the comfort women, and a woman in public revealed herself to be one of these people, and this brought a lot of media attention, and we were right in the middle of all that back in 1991. So they wanted to know about redress, and we told us as much as we could. And redress was really a concept that had spread beyond our borders. And there were people like Bishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa who spoke about our winning redress. And as you well know, later on, South Africa had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that addressed those historic abuses that had taken place. So our influence spread far and wide. Thank you.
Okay. On that note, I will also say thank you to you all who have hung in there with us as we have gone over time in our program. But you're at the end, so look forward to this part now. So many of the projects and events that NCRR 9/11 committee worked on, a committee that formed right after September 11th, 2001, were really inspired by other comments or suggestions from Muslims that we had met and were working with after that vigil. We had invited, 3 different organizations to come to the vigil. We didn't know anyone. We didn't know anything about Islam. We didn't know any Muslims. But as many people in the Japanese American community recall, people felt the need to support, and they called the mosques themselves. But initially, we took the advice of the late Dr. Maher Hatut, who was with the Muslim Public Affairs Council, who said, we just simply need to get to know each other. And so that's what our committee did. The newly formed 9/11 committee broke into teams, and we all went to visit and meet people at Muslim Public Affairs Council, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. And from that, Kamal Al-Shamshay, the community person for MPAC, suggested that a good way to get to know people was by breaking bread. And so the iftar was coming up, and we had an iftar that year, and a series of iftars followed that from 2001 to 2004. In 2007 or 8, Carrie Marita and I were at the Manzanar pilgrimage, and we happened to run into the care staff at the hotel that we were staying at in the breakfast room. And Carrie's a very friendly person, started talking to one of them, and we all found out that they were there to scout out Manzanar for a community coming to Manzanar the following year. And so what happened was that the 9/11 committee again formed into teams, intergenerational teams of former incarcerees and ourselves. And there were 5 different teams, all with different people, going to 5 different mosques. And the organizer of that from CARE, Afad Sheikh, had different mosques, invite us to come, and we showed Tad Nakamura's film Pilgrimage, and they were able to find out more about the camps from the different people that spoke. And again, during that pilgrimage, another Muslim leader, our beloved Shakil Syed, happened to mention that I wish my daughters could get to know Japanese Americans more than just once a year. I wish they could know them during the rest of the year. And so that led to another idea and a spark. And that was a start of Bridging Communities, which we started with the Japanese American Citizens League and Craig Ishii. So the Bridging Community started in 2008. It continued for several years. Actually, I think it never stopped really. And now it has a new transformation into the Solidarity Arts Fellowship under Vigilant Love. So these exchanges really led to a strong relationship between Japanese Americans and Muslim Americans, such that in 2015, all of us were on the same wavelength. I'm looking at Tracy here, and other people, when things were happening with the attacks after the Paris attacks in San Bernardino, suddenly we all felt the need to come together. And that was actually the birth of the Vigilant Love and the Vigil in Little Tokyo. So this is the end of this part of the program. And what's going to happen now is NCRR chapters in San Francisco and San Jose and other places continue to work until the bill, people had been paid. And so the bill had the sunset in 1998. And gradually people sort of ended their work with NCRR, and most of them closed down about late 90s or 2000. However, NCRR LA, because we wanted to carry on the legacy and the lessons of redress, and there was a lot going on, we decided to continue, although we did think that we could enjoy ourselves a little bit more. 2001 happened, and we were back on our road again to doing more work. So you're going to see a slideshow, a very short slideshow, about 3.5 minutes, of some of the work visually that happened from late 90s to now. And it's going to start out with a haiku poem written by Patty Nagano.
Thank you. That was really great. And I'd like to say more, but we're 38 minutes past our end time in good NCRR tradition. And so I want to apologize for that, but not really. I've been having a really wonderful time. And so what the committee has decided to do is, number one, quickly thank you all, because the formal part of the program is over, but please, if you can, stay on for the open mic, because what I think we need to do is we had one last wrap-up story to bring us full circle back to our beginnings, and that was Mari Matsumoto. And so we'll take a 3-minute break, and then we'll come back, and for those of you who need to take a break, and we will have some open mic stories. Okay, so for those of you that have to leave, it's been great. It's been a great 40 years, okay? So take good care of yourself. Peace out. Yes, we're back. We were just chatting, but oops. I'm wondering, I think people will be coming back. It says.
Can't hear you, Kay.
Oh, really? It says,
I can hear you.
I know. I was just thinking, I'm not muted.
Sorry.
Well, let's see. Maybe I was going to introduce Mia Barnett. Mia, I think you're still with us because Mia had this idea to do some screenshots before we get back online. So Mia, do you want to say something?
Yes, okay, sure. It wasn't my idea. I think June said it in the chat, and I thought it was a good idea to grab that before we move into the open mic section. Just want to take some screenshots of folks who were here. So I see people are still getting settled. But if you'd like to be in the photo of this event, please turn your camera on. And if you would prefer not to be in it, then you could just turn your camera off, stop video on the bottom left. And getting my screen set up. Okay, so there's a few pages of people, so I'm gonna take probably like 4 photos and I'll count down. All right. Looks like most people are settled in. Okay, so I'm gonna take the first one now in 3, 2, 1. One more. 3, 2, 1. And now I'm going to the second page of people. 3, 2, 1. And last one. 3, 2, 1. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mia. So you got a chance to see Mia again. And before we move to open mic, Mia, thanks again to you. All the slideshows, all the tech work, Mia and her crew, Alex and Miyako, thank you so much, because obviously we don't know how to do that stuff. Yeah, bravo. And as I mentioned before the break, we're going to ask Mari Matsumoto from San Francisco to please share something that she came up with during this process of meeting. And it kind of is a good message for us all. So if we can somehow get Mari spotlighted.
Hello. Actually, I just happened to mention during our planning process at some point that when I think of NCRR, it kind of, and how the small Japanese community, I mean, we are less than 1% of the total US population, how we managed to redress despite tremendous odds. It kind of reminded me of the popular children's story, The Little Engine That Could, you know, I think I can, I think I can. Even members of our own families were skeptical of a successful outcome, but we managed to mobilize our community while we generated support from others and endorsed local and statewide legislative and public education efforts, as well as legal campaigns such as a quorum nobis and cases and the NCRR's lawsuit. And through it all, NCRR continued chugging uphill. I think I can, I think I can. Si se puede. Building support for redress until HR 442 was finally signed into law. In many ways, the campaign was a community catharsis, and former incarcerees felt vindicated as they began receiving their checks and apologies from the government. They finally felt recognized as full citizens. Their involvement in the redress campaign helped many Japanese Americans recognize their own political power as they channeled our energies into different social justice campaigns. And Kathy spoke, and the previous slideshow also showed some ways that this activism took form. So we just realized that the once quiet Americans had reclaimed our political voice. And that's it.
Thank you, Mari. Thank you. I want to ask, I wasn't able to monitor the chat, but if were others able to monitor?
I think we had some people that had told us in advance that they had some stories that they'd like to share. And I think David Monkawa, are you here?
Are you still with us, David? I hope you'll share. I think, let's see, let me go to the next page.
Oh, there he is. Be sure to unmute yourself, David. Oh, can't hear you. Oh, can you hit the little button, the mute button on the bottom of the screen, the Zoom screen? Oh, really? It's not working? Okay, how about we'll go to the next person and come back to you. Steve Nagano, are you here?
Yes. I think they asked for one memory, but I came up with maybe a couple, and I'll talk about them briefly. I guess, you know, a real touching one was carrying the banner for the first candlelight vigil that we had at the museum. That was very touching, you know. We've got a lot standing on the corner, holding the signs. We got a lot of support from the people that passed us by. That was right after, I think it was a couple of weeks after 9/11. And, you know, the first act of, I guess, NCR and supporting the Arab and Muslims situation. So to me, that was a very important step that NCRR took in leadership as far as support for other people. The other one was, as you can see in my background, maybe being an extra and working on the film Stand Up for Justice, a story about Ralph Lazo, which I think, you know, sort of indicates our, Ralph Lazo, if you don't know, was a Mexican-American youth who stood up for his Japanese friends. and went to Manzanar. And he's the only non-spousal, non-Japanese to do that. And he stayed in camp about 1.5 years and actually got drafted out of the camp. And he was a longtime supporter of the redress movement. He died in 1992. And so, along with Visual Communications, NCRR embarked on making this film. And we got quite a lot of play. I think Kathy said we showed films at the mosque, but one of the films that we did show was Stand Up for Justice. And we've shown Stand Up for Justice in various workshops up and down California. We even did we actually went to Washington, and in the House of Representatives room, we did a presentation to not only to representatives in Congress, but also to National Education Association. And for me, one of the things that has been most, just going back on, being an extra on the film, as well as all kinds of other things, sewing, doing arts and doing crafts, sewing the hems, getting people fitted, finding people to be extras, was the experience of the day that we filmed. One of the scenes we filmed was getting on the train. And there was several of you that were there also. Tony was there, Jenny was there, Kathy was there. But I think for a short, very short, brief moment, we were in the shoes of our parents and grandparents. And although we knew it was just a movie, I think the feeling that I got from that was a touch of how they felt going through. I mean, we knew that, hey, by the end of the day, we'll be at home sleeping in our beds, but these people went in not knowing that, hey, they might be taken out to the desert and shot.
About him,
and so, that experience was very moving for me. And of course, some of the third one was some of us, Susie, Janice, Kathy Kay, Patty, myself, we worked for many, many years and many, many hours on, I don't know if you can see it, the commission hearings, the 23 hours of the commission hearings. One of the things we did was we summarized every testimony. We indexed every testimony, all 157, because there were several people that repeated. There's 153 testimonies. And recently, a couple of years ago, we finished a 13 DVD set in which each testimony is menu driven. So for me, seeing the testimonies over and over and over again, it really made me feel the pain, the shame, the loss of dignity, and the anger that subsequently existed in our community. And to a great degree is still with us today. And I think that's great that in some ways, I want to steal a phrase from Ruben down there, Ruben Guevara, that I think NCR and individuals in it should look at ourselves as cultural sculptors, people who form a culture. And I think the JA culture should be one that includes the fight for justice and equality. And I think that we're agents of that. And I think we should continue doing that to sort of reiterate what Alan was saying, was about to rejoice, remember. And I think right now, most importantly, the last part is to recommit, because have we moved forward from 1988 in terms of our society, in terms of justice and equality? I think I would say not. So those are some of my memories and influences. And again, to reiterate what Alan says, the friendships through the struggles have been very important to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Since I don't see that anybody on the chat,
I think
there's
we had let's see, let's check and see if David figured out his mic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think I can go.
Good. Oh, great.
Can you hear? Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
go ahead.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, well, you know, the whole thing was like really life-changing experience. And what made it so was like meeting people like Frank Emi, Carmen Mochizuki called up. I was doing intake at the LA office because I was a staff person there, $400 a month. And I think you owe me some a little bit. Anyway, that's okay. I'll write it off. But like, you know, those people calling in, and Sam Miyamoto with the, you know, the moms and babies used for hostage exchange. And each story was like more mind-boggling than the other. So like, I was, it was really kind of shocking, wrangling, because, you know, I would answer these phone calls and it was almost nonstop the first couple of weeks after the, you know, after the win. And like people had all these problems with the ORA. So like they would call me and say, well, what about this and what about that? And they'd tell me these stories, like the railroad workers, you know, and like, and I'm just like, my mouth is open listening to these things. So that was like incredible. And I think that the thing that I remember too is the faces of everybody that got it afterwards. That I'll never forget. That's the number one thing, the faces of the people after we won. And then the faces of the people that told me that you'll never get it. I enjoyed that too. That was very nice to gloat in front of them. And then I think the other thing is remembering the opening of the founding conference in 1980, because we had about the warehouse workers strike, we had a march of 400 and had it, you know, going out of the conference, the founding conference, so I'll never forget that. And I think the things that I wouldn't really do anything over, but the things that I do think about that maybe we could have done this way, because, you know, nothing's ever perfect, was one is that at the very beginning, I think that I would have really pushed for emergency legislation to archive people who are dying, the witnesses, because at the very end, and it was too bad it was at the end, it should have been at the beginning. At the end, we figured out with Bob Bratt and the ORA that about 200 Japanese were dying each month. We looked at all the obituaries and added them all up, and about 200. So that became the official ORA line, 200 a month. And so that means that they owe us about 48 million because, you know, like John was saying, after the bill was passed, the money didn't come. So between the passage of the bill and the money, you know, there's about a year and a half worth of people that died. So then that, and then I think the other thing that might, and it'll be really good for African Americans too, because, you know, we can't really tell them how to run their bill, but certainly we could let them know, you know, that Karen Bass or somebody know that, hey, listen, you know, if you've all passed legislation at the beginning to archive everybody, that would really help, because if you extrapolate our percentage in numbers to African Americans, probably about 4,800 a month dying of African Americans who've seen, you know, everything from Jim Crow to stuff like that, but we were going to lose them all. So anyway, that was one. And then the other thing was that I thought that the Korematsu, you know, which was the foundation of racial discrimination and putting people away in the camps, is still going on. And it was the basis for Trump versus the Trump's Muslim ban. And it's also the basis for the indefinite detention and endless war provision and all the National Defense Authorization Acts, you know, all of them. So if we would have taken that up, you know, abolish Korematsu or something right afterwards, right after, you know, the redress, you know, who knows what would have happened, you know. But anyway, so those are some of the things I think about. And but all in all, you know, it was a very life-changing experience. And I hope that, you know, and I'm very happy that NCR is putting so much attention to like workers, you know. You know, we had Bert, transport worker, Jim Saito, you know, you name it, you know, people are waitresses, and those are the people that really provided the energy. And you could see what happens when people like that are gone, right? You could see the difference in the energy level. And so I thought that it was really great that NCR really paid a lot of attention to that and mentioned
the term working class, which is hardly done anymore. So I thought that was really great. So, and thanks so much, Kay, and you and Susan and everybody else put this together.
No, thanks, David.
Sure.
Thanks. Good report.
And thank you, David, for all the art over all the years. It's been so inspiring, and you've really been, a lot of your art has been the face of the redress movement for such a long time, and it's just been so wonderful.
Not to take away from Susan's compliment to you, David, I want to just say that I worked with you a lot getting those DOR posters created over the decades. You were really hard to work with. You were so difficult. I would talk nice to you, and then I'd tell all of my friends, oh my God, that David, he's such an artist, he's so picky, but the work was good. You got better as you aged, okay? You're a little more mellow. Thank you, David.
Thank you. It's because of my kind and gentle lifestyle.
All right.
Thank you.
We're gonna, I understand, Guy Aoki. Where are you, Guy? Has a story. As soon as we can find you. Is your microphone, are you muted?
Where is he? Oh, it's so hard to find people in the... Guy, are you still there?
I see a lot of screens with no people.
Uh-oh.
So maybe, okay, while we're trying to find Guy, I know that Mia had mentioned to me that she wanted to share a special story. Yeah, Mia? There you are.
Hi. Okay. I wanted to share a story about how Rudy Tokiwa I feel was responsible for winning over the Florida delegation during the big vote in 1987, in 1988 or 87, whatever. So when we were on that lobbying delegation in 1987, I was on a team with Rudy. One of the people that we needed to talk with was Congressman Charles Bennett. He was a conservative Democrat from Florida, and he was non-committal. We had a kind of a tense meeting with him. We had good people in the group. Rudy Tokiwa, Bert was in there, a couple of other 442nd guys. I was in there, and he was just like real stone-faced, non-committal, nodding, and then then the meeting was over. And when we left, we were walking down the hall and we're thinking, man, this is going to be a hard one. I don't know if we can get him. And then Congressman Bennett opened his back door into the hall, and he motioned for Rudy to come over. So Rudy went over to talk with him. The rest of us were kind of down the hall waiting for him. And we saw that Rudy and the congressman were talking in real low voices. And then Rudy came back and joined us, and I didn't think anything more about it. So fast forward to the day of the vote, that all of us were there. We were packed in the public area, and where you can look down into the galley where the members of Congress are. But there's a special area in the balcony for people with disabilities. So I went up there with Rudy we're leaning on the rail and watching the vote. And, it was like really exciting, and we won, and everybody was celebrating and everything. But the next morning, Rudy said he wanted to drop by Congressman Bennett's office to thank him, because Bennett did vote for us. So we went down to Bennett's office, and, Rudy went in there by himself, and he told Congressman Bennett, Congressman, I want to thank you for voting for our bill. We really appreciate it. And Congressman Bennett said, I didn't know how I was going to vote. In fact, I had my staff person write up a statement supporting the bill and write up a statement against the bill. And the younger guys kept coming up to me and saying, Congressman, how should we vote on this? How should we vote on this? And he says, well, I don't know. I'm not decided yet. And he said he was sitting there and he noticed some flash of light, and he looked up, and he saw Rudy in the balcony. It was Rudy's cane, metal cane, that caught the flash of light, that somehow caught Congressman Bennett's eye. And he said, he looked up there and he said, "Ah, hell, I'll support the bill." And the whole Florida delegation came with him. And I want to tell you, I love Rudy, but this is a story that really shows that when you put a human face on the issue, you can make a difference. But of course, it was Rudy's personality and his power of persuasion. But I will always remember and love that about Rudy. He made a difference.
Yeah. Thank you, Mia. Thank you. I guess we'll throw it now to Guy. Guy's back. Hey,
Hey,
nice to see you.
nice to see all of you. You guys can hear me?
Yes.
One of the things that meant a lot to me was the kind of celebrity support we got in redress. You know, I grew up reading about civil rights and how a lot of white people supported African American issues and stuff, but you don't know how much they support Asian American issues or Japanese American issues until you actually ask them. So one of the things we're trying to do was have a variety show. Instead of DR, we're supposed to have a variety show because we're trying to raise money for, I guess, the 86 lobbying effort. I know Mia got, who's that guy? Johnny Otis to be on it. And so I was tasked to ask Casey Kasem, and he had like a fundraiser with the National Enquirer. But he goes, well, let me ask my wife. So she goes, I talked to Gina about it, and she says, your cause is more important, so let's do yours. So I said, of course, we couldn't get it together, so there was no variety show, so we went ahead and did a regular DOR. But another thing that was nice, and we sent a lot of letters we sent out to like Martin Sheen, Edward Asner, Jane Fonda, a lot of people, Graham Nash, and remember Peter, Paul, and Mary. So Mary Travers got back to me through her manager, and she was interested in doing it. So that was the first sense I got that they weren't just for civil rights when it affected African Americans, but they could see how our issue was also important. So that meant a lot to me. And then after the first Gulf War, I was asked to give Casey Kasem to speak at Day of Remembrance. And it was so cool to be able to introduce him to the people at the J Theater and let people know how much his work had impacted my life. And he did this great speech where he said, you know, they're not talking so much about putting Arab Americans in camp. And I think it's because of the work that you in this room did about fighting so hard for redress and reparations and explaining to people what this country did to its loyal citizens. And so on behalf of all Arab Americans and people of color, I want to thank you for this. And it was so beautiful. And without being told, every Japanese American speaker at Day of Remembrance at that event talked about the way that Arab Americans were being treated, just like we were being looked at suspiciously after World War II. They're being looked at suspiciously, and they're being investigated by the FBI. And then Don Bustani, who was the president of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and he was the co-creator of American Top 40. He was the guy who hired me. He was there, and he came up to me during intermission, and he was so excited. He goes, "Guy, I am so impressed with the Japanese American community. You guys you really have your act together. We got to get more like you guys." And I think it was after that that you guys formed a committee with Arab Americans to help them through this process to explain, this is what happened to us. This is probably what's going to happen to you if it hasn't already happened. So let us try to work together. And the third thing I remember was after we passed the bill, in 1989, we saw how little money they're going to actually pay out for this bill. So we decided to have a national day of protest to draw media attention to the fact that Congress is not funding this bill. So again, we went to a whole list of celebrities. Who can we get? And there had just been a calendar section article, cover story article on Edward James Olmos. And Mia said the same thing that I said. He said, we Mexicans are Asians. And we went, holy crap, that's our guy. That's our guy. So it turned out that I knew his neighbor, Dennis Lambert. Dennis Lambert was one of the biggest writers and producers. He produced Rhinestone Cowboy. You know, he wrote One Tin Soldier. He produced Night Shift for the Commodores. And I had interviewed him in '88, and he told me that his neighbor was Edward James Olmos, and they were best friends, and they had a production deal together. So I had a way to reach Edward James Olmos, and his assistant told me, well, he's in Bolivia filming a movie. He's going to come back for like 2 days, and he's going to go out again. So I'm not sure if he has time to call you. But he called me on the first day he came back, and he said, wait, I thought this was taken care of. They haven't paid the money yet? They haven't paid the money yet. I go, wait. This is the Japanese-American bill, right? For people who were put in camp during World War II. Yes. They haven't gotten paid. No. Okay, wait. So he kept checking. He could not believe this. He could not believe this had not been paid. So I said, I promise you, they have not paid this bill out, and people are dying every day. And that's why we have to have this protest. Can you be part of our protest? Because I'll be there. So we had Edward James Olmos leading 1,000 people to Little Tokyo. And CBS National News covered us. All the local news people covered us. So it was so gratifying. And when he spoke to people, there was like a canopy, and there were a lot of older people sitting down to listen to Edward. And he said, you know, I was born in this Japanese hospital, and Dr. So-and-so brought me into this world, who was also Japanese American. And so people began, oh yeah, you know, they know that doctor. So he was really making connections about how we're all intertwined. And he said, oh, Mr. and Mrs. La La La. And he saw another Japanese American couple because he knew them from when he was growing up. And he said, you know, I didn't know they were going to be here. They didn't know I was going to be here. This is how we're all interconnected. And so when Guy called me up and said, this was not taken care of, I said, are you kidding me? So it was just so great to see all these different people, not just saying this cause is important to me, but to actually come out there and put themselves out there and speak to it and show how many ties we already had with each other, although maybe we didn't know it, but to also create new ties with the Arab American community, and later on what you guys did with the Muslim community. So that, I think that was really important. And we got a lot of press coverage because of that.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you for the good memories.
Hey, can I jump in and just say 2 sentences? When Edward James Olmos was speaking at the day of protest, do you remember there was kind of a little scream and shuffling in the audience? And this family came running up. They were his next door neighbors when they were sent to camp. And it was like such a tearful reunion. And it was just so beautiful. And I just wanted to add that as an addendum to what Guy was saying about Edward James Olmos.
Thank you. If we had another few hours, we have so many wonderful memories. But thank you for that. And I know that Mari and John, either one had a story, then Kathy.
That was you. I unmuted you, so just get on.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to tell a short story. It's kind of similar to the Inoue one, but this one involves Bob Matsui. I don't know, it might have been that same trip, but we also tried to set up a meeting with his office, and we got the same runaround. He said, oh, he's busy, but you know, you can meet with one of his aides. So in that case, we actually did meet with one of his aides, and you know, it went so. And then afterwards, a bunch of us were standing in the halls, you know, talking about how our different meetings had gone, and we happened to be standing by one of the elevators, and this was like, I don't know, 20 minutes after our meeting with Matsui's office, and then all of a sudden the elevator door opens, and who comes walking out but Bob Matsui, you know, and then he's got kind of this kind of like, oh, you know, kind of guilty look on his face, you know. And so what I figured out later is that he just you know, during the time that we met with his office, he just went out someplace else, made himself scarce, and then, you know, was on his way back. He figured we'd be long gone, and then all of a sudden he bumps into us, you know. So that was another example of how some people tried to avoid us. On the other hand, Matsunaga and Mineta were very, very nice and very welcoming, and they didn't give us that kind of runaround. The other thing I want to say is just a short comment. I mean, I was really glad to hear how James Omura, Mits Koshiyama, and Frank Emmy were honored in the communities. I think that's really great. And I think one of the really significant things about our 1987 trip to Washington was the fact that our group included 42nd veterans, and also some of the resistors like Frank Emmy, Fred Korematsu. And to my knowledge or thinking, that was one of the first times that, you know, both resistors and 42nd guys had come together and worked together on a project, and you know, they got along fine. But I thought that was kind of pretty significant.
Thank you, John. Okay, we'll go. I think that Kathy was next. She had a little story for us.
Well, I am going to tag on to what John Ota just said, because, you know, he mentioned the resistors, and I remember when he talked about Mits, the same humility and the same concern that their involvement in redress might harm the cause. I think Frank shared that as well. And he said, you know, should I go on the delegation? You know, would it be helpful or would it be harmful? And, you know, and the only time he ever asked for anything was one time when we had the 522 on a panel at Centenary. They were the ones that actually liberated Dachau. And Frank just very quietly said, do you think you could not have Harold Harada on the panel? Because Harold Harada was a guy that blasted the resistors and talked about, you know, people turning over in their graves if the resistors were, you know, even mentioned. And so he asked that in a very quiet manner. And, you know, it's kind of like, that's the only thing he did. And to me, it was like, so, you know, so typical of, you know, Frank, and also, you know, when you mentioned Mits. So, you know, just to say that their spirit and the quality of their humanity was just, you know, out there. The other thing is that we had a program on the American Friends Service Committee, and how they were one of the few groups that really supported Japanese Americans, you know, from the camps and during the camps and afterwards. And we had this huge program. It was overflow crowd at the Democracy Center at Janum. And I remember Reverend Paul Nagano was there as well, because, you know, many people related to the American Friends. And there was one man in the program. We asked if there's anybody there that remembers the American Friends, and everybody there wanted to thank them for what they had done. And so one man had been a child, and he had received a gift from the American Friends Service Committee. And he said, I never got a chance to thank them. I was supposed to write a thank you note, but I never did. And he felt very bad about it. He said, I want to thank them today because they were there. And then he said, I have the gift that they gave me. And we said, well, what is that gift? And then he pulled this book out of his bag that he had with him. He kept it all those years from the camps. And this is like 2000 or whatever. And I should have had it in the slideshow. But he showed the book and he said, The Little Engine That Could. So when you read that story, Marty,
no kidding.
It was like, oh my God, you know, and everybody in that audience was in tears after that. So just wanted to share, and, you know, and there's so many stories that we don't know, you know, but anyway, that's my story.
Thank you. I love that story. Okay, I think back to Susan.
I just want to tell a quick story. Yeah. So this is about Rudy also, but, you know, one of the things that I think sometimes we forget, but the way that racism hurts children is that the children see their parents treated like shit, right? So that's a very harmful thing for children, right? And I think the whole model minority thing was really harmful for Sansei to see their parents being portrayed in this way, right? So when we met Rudy, Rudy just blew up the model minority for us and told us stories about violence and things like that. And it was just kind of, let me just tell you the story. So when he and his brother were in high school, they were in Salinas, and Salinas high school football team, they jumped Rudy and his brother, and they were assaulted, right? But the high school punished Rudy and his brother for this thing, right? And then World War II ensues, and they go off to camp, and he goes off to the Europe, fight in Europe, and then he comes back, and he went to his high school, and he saw them having an assembly, and the teacher that punished them was now the principal, and he was in front of the whole school giving a speech. And Rudy, the way Rudy tells it, he walked right up to the stage and got on the stage, and he told the entire high school that this principal was a piece of garbage and that he wanted to wipe the stage with him. Wow. And anyway, and then the second story was, you hear these stories about noble 442 veterans being refused a haircut or something. So Rudy and his friends went to a restaurant, and the guy looked at him and they says, we don't serve people like you. And so the way Rudy tells it is, so we messed up the place and then told him, I guess you won't be serving anyone.
Okay, Rudy.
And I think that, even that, I think that was very inspiring to a lot of us. Anyway, so anyway, that's my story.
Thank you. I love those stories. I don't see on the chat any other stories. Did we have anyone else? Because, I think it's 4:52 and maybe just one or two more stories. But while people are either typing in or not, I want to say that besides the wonderful 40 years with NCRR and all the friends who've become like family to me, being on the committee for this 40th anniversary event has been wonderful. To work with Susan and Tom, Marlene, Donna, Bill, all the people from up north, that came to all the different meetings and helped us to put this together. It's been a pleasure. You're terrific, terrific folks. I am sorry we didn't get more interaction. I worked more with John Ota during the 90s, right, John? And going to Washington and redress denials. So that was great. But it's been marvelous, really marvelous.
And I think it's very clear that we have more stories. So I think, so we'll save this recording, but maybe it percolate. People should start thinking about, what's part 2? No. Anyway, before we forget all these stories. So yeah, but I think probably we should close, but I
think we have to at some point. I see that Guy has typed something on. Well, and Mia, I'm just thinking if they're like 1 minute each, maybe, because I keep shifting my screen to get more light onto me. It's dark outside. So, okay, Guy and Mia. Guy, go first.
I just want to say congratulations on 40 years. The thing that's great about what we accomplished with passing the redress bill, I mean, it is historic. Like I said at the event in Janum, to turn this thing around within 7 years, 1981 to 1988, and to get the support of people in Los Angeles, because I remember the LA Times, the person who hired me in '88, he said when the commission hearing started, all the letters they got were just thoroughly negative against redress. But by the time Reagan signed the bill in '88, the majority was for redress, and that's because of the work you guys did in using the media to talk about what really happened. And that turned everything around. And I just want to say that you guys are still relevant. It's really hard for any organization that's been around that long to still be relevant. And you've done this because you've applied the same concepts about the way that we were mistreated to other groups. So I am really proud of you guys. I'm proud of what you work with Muslims and Arab Americans and Mexican Americans. And just keep up the great work, because I'm proud to have been a part of this organization.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you so much. And Mia, you want to close us out?
Oh no, this is a violent story. I was tracking off of Susan. But one of the things I always say when I think talk or think about redress is that, you know, in this struggle, the Japanese American people stood up. You know, we stood strong, and this is one positive thing that the struggle did for us. So Bob Bratt, who was the head of the Office for Redress Administration, was going around to different cities talking to groups about how to, you know, apply for their redress payments. And in Gardena, there's this group of white racists, you know, camp deniers, you know, Lillian Baker and that ilk, that used to always come to community meetings. And so Bob was telling me at this one meeting, this, you know, a big white guy was, you know, making all these racist comments and negative remarks. And he said this little Nisei guy went up to him and jumped up and clocked him. When Bob was telling me, he couldn't believe it. He kept saying, that guy just clocked him, you know. And I think that, you know, that's the power of redress and reparations and the power of unity in the community, that we are not going to take this stuff anymore.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good one. You know, I'm trying to keep up on the chats, and so I think we're coming to a close, but thank you for your comments in the chats too, like Kimi and Ruben and Kristen. I have more juicy stories, but time is, you know, up. So I'm gonna, you know, help plan a second event, and we'll have, I promise you, more of the juicy stories, the backstory to NCRR. So I think we're good. Thank you all. You know, you are my family, and I hope to see you again soon. Stay well, stay safe. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Our last toast.
Oh yeah. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good to see everyone.
We should make a last toast.
We just did, Guy.
Did? How did I miss that?
For the next 40 years.
Everybody.
No more left.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, Mia Barnett.
Thank you, Mia.
Mia was great. Woo. And Alex and Miyako, thank you.
It was fun to work together on this. Thanks, everyone.
Woo.
All right, I'm gonna end the call, but
Oh.
have a good night, everyone. Or if you want to
good
stay
night,
on, I
everyone.
can leave the call open. Let me know.
No.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. We'll have to talk.
More violence, more violence.
Okay.